All right, so I have two articles for you in this video. The first one is from Democracy Docket, and among other things, it basically reminds you that when people are concerned that the point of these crackdowns, like say in Chicago, which I just saw a notification that a border official has arrived in Chicago, or whether it be in LA, which I shall remind you, there are still National Guardsmen stationed in LA. It's not like it's a done deal, everybody's out. And of course, in DC, is the ultimate goal is to control our elections. And we have proof that that's exactly what people want. It's, by people, I mean the Trump administration. It isn't us just screaming into the ether that, oh my God, this could happen. This isn't a sky is falling, Chicken Little declaration. It's the end game, among other things from this article. So the headline is Trump's plot to control elections, the GOP's nationwide gerrymander, and DOJ's hunt for voter fraud. All right, so let's dive right into the darkness. As Jim Saska reported to us last week, there's increasing concerns among Democrats and election experts that Trump could use the military or law enforcement to thwart fair elections in 2026 and 2028, something he's mused about doing before. One policy expert told Jim he worries that Virginia's gubernatorial election, for which voting starts next month, could offer a dress rehearsal for Trump's plans. New comments from perhaps the most dangerous and well-connected anti-voting advocate in the country, which Matt Cohen shone a light on this week, should add to those concerns. Cleta Mitchell, the Trump ally who played a key role in his failed bid to overturn the 2020 election, told a right-wing podcast host that she thinks Trump will declare our porous voting system a threat to national sovereignty and use that as a justification to exercise some emergency powers to protect federal elections going forward. Right, because our voting systems are so porous. That's why, no voter fraud was found. Because that's how porous our voting systems are. Oh my God. And they still haven't figured out, these are the same voting machines that were used in 2020 that were used in 2024. Okay, so if they were so porous, then your win is fraudulent, right? That's how this goes, right? Anyway, now Matt tracks the far-right anti-voting world as closely as any reporter out there, but Mitchell's alarming comments were made on podcasts anyone can listen to. We're always proud to bring you voting and democracy news you can't find anywhere else. But it's troubling that key MAGA figures, and Mitchell isn't the only one, are openly saying they plan to cancel fair elections, and most major media outlets don't seem interested. And that's the scary thing. Now, a lot of the major media outlets, like CBS News, just got an ombudsman for news to make sure that everything is fair and accurate, because apparently CBS News wasn't that before. Who is the institute he is a part of, the Hudson Institute, is conservative leaning. Now, obviously, actual conservative voices should be heard. However, they should not trump reality. Nor should and this is something that most news organizations have a problem with, is that just because there are two sides to a story doesn't mean that they're two equally accurate sides. There are certain stories out there that are one-sided. Like if you go look outside and there isn't going to be a discussion about, the color of the sky or the color of the grass or whether the sun is out or whether it's cloudy. Now, the only argument I could see in that is whether you want to say it's mostly cloudy or partly sunny. Because to me, that's just a different way to phrase the same thing. However, you don't have to two-sides that. Facts do not need to be two-sided. Now, there are certain complicated issues where there's this set of facts that point to this conclusion and this set of facts that point to that conclusion. It's called science. However, not everything is like that. Like, let's just take anti-vaxxers. You do not have to both sides this. Well, you do now because our HHS secretary is a brainworm. And I'm pretty sure that the worm residing in his brain is infinitely smarter, even though dead. But still, why should we give both sides? One side has facts and one side has feelings. Isn't MAGA supposed to be facts don't care about your feelings? And yet, if facts go against said feelings, they lose their damn minds. Anyway, so yes, the media outlets should, number one, point this out, because the only time I saw it briefly pointed out, and I don't remember if it was on the national news or on his Instagram, was that Pritzker pointed that out. That they want to, take over Chicago so they can also watch over the elections, which is one of the reasons why they're going after blue states. Because DC is a blue city, LA is a blue city in a blue state, Chicago is a blue city in a blue state. If this was about crime, the states that were lending support to the federal government, which were all red states, would be using their National Guard to combat crime in those states, which have higher crime rates. So, yeah, it's pretty obvious what's happening here. And, oh yes, when they were talking about other figures on the right that said the same thing, I don't know about all of them, but definitely one of them was Steve Bannon. Of course, the more immediate scheme that Trump and the GOP are using to rig 2026 is their national gerrymandering plot. In August, Jen Rice, who's well-sourced in the Texas legislature thanks to her time at the Houston Chronicle, covered every twist and turn in the effort by Lone Star State Republicans to grab 5 more seats for their party through a mid-decade redistricting. Because, that's totally kosher, totally legal. Then last week, Jen unearthed past racist comments about immigrants made by state senator who played a key role in ramming the GOP's skewed map through. Shocked Pikachu face. What the heck? This should come as a surprise to absolutely no one. Of course, the Republicans that want to prevent black people from voting are racist. What a shock! Seriously, the only people who aren't seeing that are either really, really dumb, or or put their or more charitably, just keep their head in the sand and don't want to see bad things, or are racist themselves. And so don't see the problem because, well, white people good, black people bad, black people barely sentient. So they don't see a problem. Anyway, on Tuesday, after our reporting went viral online, the lawmaker offered an apology on the Senate floor. Yes, I'm sure the apology was, "I'm so sorry that you found out I'm racist," rather than "I'm sorry that I'm racist," because rather than "I'm sorry that I said something racist," because again, if you're trying to ram through a racist redistricting, you're fucking racist. Even if you accidentally said something racist, because let's face it, we've all said something stupid that could be construed as racist, but saying something racist and being racist aren't necessarily the same thing. You can say something racist or bigoted in general, and once you're told why, the people who don't want to be racist learn from that experience and they try to be better. Those who are racist don't give a shit. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's more of an apology. "I'm sorry you found out I'm racist," rather than a genuine apology. And since the Republican gerrymandering campaign isn't stopping with Texas, neither is Jen. Next up for her, the Show Me State, where Republicans are trying to squeeze out another House seat at the expense of Kansas City's black voters. Now, California is going to, the state legislature has given Gavin the green light to put a referendum in November to fight fire with fire. With that, okay, Texas is doing this illegal redistricting. Well, we're going to redistrict too, and we can also manage to squeeze out 5 votes. So that would negate the 5 votes they would potentially be getting in Texas. I still would laugh hysterically, and I really, really hope this happens, that this backfires on Texas so bad that they will redistrict, but because there are plenty of Republicans who are seriously pissed off with this administration, that the Republicans will back the Democrat. That this was a bridge too far. Because as Texans keep telling me, this is not a Republican state. This isn't a red state. It is a non-voting state. There are apparently more registered Democrats than Republicans in Texas. I still haven't heard anyone explain to me how Ted Cruz is possible then. But I guess, again, if only the wackaloon Republicans are voting, then that makes sense. But, so even though I get why Gavin's doing this, but at the same time, it fills me with concern because we're trying to advocate how great democracy is, and then we're throwing out these norms but at the same time, if someone's going to fight dirty, following the rules generally doesn't work either. So, anyway. All right. Finally, Matt also tackled a question that's been worrying election experts. Why does the Trump administration want states' voter registration data? Among the most plausible and troubling of the potential answers voiced by secretaries of state and leading election administration experts he spoke to, they want to use the data selectively to bolster their false narrative about rampant illegal voting. That's one. That's definitely one. Another thing that they probably want the registration data for is to intimidate intimidate voters because they wouldn't have to go to the polls to intimidate people there if they have names and addresses of people where they can send letters or people can go door to door and, just imply what would happen if they don't vote the way you want them to. So, yeah, I could see that being a thing too, having a protection racket. We'll protect you as long as you do what we want. But also, they probably are so up their own asses about illegal voting and undocumented people voting that it's possible they're desperately looking for that as well. I think really what they're trying to do is find the data, even though it doesn't exist, to justify their conspiracy theories, Oregon Secretary of State told Matt. And just in case we haven't given you enough reasons to get angry, there's also a dangerous new legal assault on the Voting Rights Act. Watch for our coverage next week. So, yay. So that is the end of that brief article from the Democracy Docket. Let's see here. Okay, so next up, we have, now this is just, I'm not quite sure what to make of this. Whether Donald Trump really doesn't understand domestic violence, or maybe that's why Melania doesn't want to spend any time around him because he beats the crap out of her, or more likely she beats the crap out of him. But either way, it's very, very bizarre how he is playing down domestic violence, and in a very bizarre way. But then again, everything Trump does is bizarre, so there's that. Trump downplays domestic violence in speech about religious freedom. And this is from The Advocate. All right, again, this is a story that was originally published in the 19th. So, again, I really have to take a look at this publication because, again, this is the only publication I've read where they do stories from the 19th. So, apparently they do reporting on gender, politics, and policies. So, anyway, President Donald Trump on Monday downplayed the severity of domestic violence crimes, saying that were it not for things that take place in the home they call crime, the administration's deployment of National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. would have resulted in a bigger statistical reduction in crime. Which screams that he does not think domestic violence is an actual thing. People in the media have been questioning, specifically Pod Save America, whether his brain solidified, lost all flexibility in the 80s. I'm starting to wonder if it wasn't the 70s. Because in the 80s already, soap operas were showing marital rape and showing that how horrible it is, so that's a thing. And this is the early 80s. So, yeah. The fact that he doesn't recognize domestic violence as a crime, not a good look, but given what we know of him when it comes to women and underage girls, I'm going to say this should not be that surprising, but still, And, the grab him by the pussy thing. So he obviously does not see domestic violence and sexual violence as a thing. President Donald Trump, I already read that one. They said crime's down 87%. I said, no, it's more than 87%. Virtually nothing, and much lesser things that take place in the home, they call crime. They'll do anything they can to find something. If a man has a little fight with the wife, they say this was a crime. See? So now I can't claim 100%, but we are. We are a safe city, Trump said. Okay. So much to unpack here. First off, nobody says just a disagreement with your spouse constitutes a crime. But the fact that he said with the wife tells you what he thinks of women. No wonder Melania doesn't want to be around him or around him as little as possible. Doesn't want to hold his hand. And, I'm pretty sure because Barron speaks Slovenian just like she does, I'm pretty sure that they talk about Trump in front of his face because they do not even need to hide it because there's no way he speaks another language. He barely speaks English. So it tells you how little he regards women. That's one thing. And like I said, a little fight. Married couples fight. That's just the way it is. And you're gonna yell back and forth. I remember living in the Heights, and I would hear screaming outside my window. And I was on the 3rd floor. It's not like I was on the 1st floor and hearing screams right outside my window. I was hearing it right outside my window, but from down below. So yeah, things can get heated. Nobody's calling that a crime. What's the crime is when you raise your hand to the other person. And yes, women can beat the crap out of men. I mean, that's just a thing. There are some women who can totally do that. So I'm not going to say, it's obviously more so that women are the victims because in general, men are stronger. So, yeah, there is that. But, yeah, domestic violence happens on both ways. You can beat up each other. I remember reading a story about Loretta Lynn, and nobody can accuse her of being butch. She was tiny, but she once claimed about her husband Mooney that there was never a time he hit her once that she didn't hit back twice. So she stood up for herself, but that's still domestic violence on both their parts. That doesn't change things. The president's comments were part of a speech he delivered at the Religious Liberty Commission's meeting at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. Domestic violence has long been recognized by the federal government as a national public health and safety crisis. A national survey by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention found that 4 in 10 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced physical or sexual violence or stalking by an intimate partner. And let's face it, if you're going to be attacked, it's going to be by an intimate partner. This stranger danger thing, though real, I'm not going to underplay. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. Doesn't happen as often as a situation where you know the other party. So, I'm actually glad that this article points out that this happens to men as well. Next month marks the 25th annual Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which coincides with the 2000 reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. The law increased federal funding to combat domestic violence and other crimes that disproportionately affect women, recognizing the matter as a public health and safety issue, not a private domestic matter. The federal government is by far the biggest source of funding for anti-domestic violence efforts, and since taking office, the Trump administration has sought to restrict nonprofits' access to federal domestic violence grants. Well, if you don't believe domestic violence is a thing, that makes sense. They have also laid off a top official and several teams working on the issue, threatening to destabilize domestic violence services and prevention efforts nationwide. In a statement to the 19th, the White House said the president wasn't talking about or downplaying domestic violence. Why is it that the White House always, puts out a statement that basically says you can't believe your eyes and ears? President Trump's executive order to address crime in D.C. even specifically took action against domestic violence, said Abigail Jackson, a spokesperson for the White House. The order urged the Department of Housing and Urban Development to investigate housing providers who don't comply with requirements to restrict tenants who engage in criminal activity, including domestic violence. I'm wondering if it isn't something that someone put in an executive order mentioning domestic violence, and Trump just signs whatever they put in front of him, and whatever explanation they give, he's like, okay, and signs it, and they might not have even mentioned domestic violence. Or either that, or he's aware that domestic violence is bad. But I'm pretty sure it's the former, considering, E. Jean Carroll happened. He doesn't seem to have a problem walking in on naked women, strange naked women, strange naked girls. So I'm going to say that it's the former, that he did not even know domestic violence was even a part of this executive order. The White House also pointed out that the administration barred transgender women from women's domestic abuse shelters, a move that advocates warn makes trans women less safe. Yeah, that part, of course, Trump would be aware of. And the fact that they're pointing that out as proof that he cares about domestic violence proves that nobody in the White House actually understands trans women. Because, like I've mentioned many times before, most trans women are straight. So, they aren't interested in the women in these domestic violence shelters because they're not interested in them. They're not attracted to women. They're attracted to men. So why the hell would they abuse the women in these shelters? This has nothing to do with domestic violence. This has everything to do with being fucking bigots. So, because I still swear that these people think that these are obvious men in dresses. I mean, drag queens don't look like obvious men in dresses. So why would you think that trans women would look like obvious women in dresses, obvious men in dresses? Drag queens don't even look like that. And they're not trying to transition. They just happen to look good as women. All right. While President Trump is making America safer, the fake news is whipping up their latest hoax in real time to distract from the administration's tremendous results, Jackson said. Right. We're the ones who are trying to distract. That's why you're releasing the Epstein files, right? That's why you're denying that Trump is in the Epstein files, right? I was willing to believe that Trump was just knew Epstein, and that it could have been possible that he isn't a pedophile. Now, I'm just doing that based on Trump being in the Epstein files. His other behavior has bellied the fact that he's a pedophile. However, I would have believed that, okay, he's just in there because they were friends at one time and he had nothing to do with what actually happened. Except for the fact that he is fighting tooth and nail to stop the release of the Epstein files. You do not do that if you are innocent. So, all right. Some groups focused on combating domestic violence criticized the president's comments. Oh, what could possibly be criticizable in those comments as I criticize them? The DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence believes that intimate partner violence is a crime and more than a little fight with the wife, as President Trump stated earlier today. Per federal and local statute, domestic violence is a crime, and one that is not only a precursor to domestic violence homicides, but also a common factor in community violence, including mass shootings, where perpetrators often have a history of committing domestic violence, said Don Dalton, the coalition's executive director. Yes, I still remember we actually had a mass shooting in my little community here in Wisconsin. And it was a domestic violence incident because first the man went to a law firm, and it was a divorce case. And he shot the lawyer. He went to his, I don't know if she was an ex-wife yet or soon to be ex-wife, place of business, killed two of her coworkers as they told her to hide. And he also ended up killing a police officer. And that was stemming from domestic violence, because there was no way in hell that this was just him snapping one day. This was totally, he was beating the shit out of her. And she finally had enough, tried to leave, and then this happened. So, yeah. By reducing domestic violence to a little fight, President Trump revives a regressive view from an era when survivors were expected to endure abuse alone, without legal protections or without public support, said Susanna Saul, Director, Legal Programs at Her Justice, a nonprofit that provides free legal services to women living in poverty in New York City. This does more than trivialize domestic abuse. It emboldens abusers to increase their violence and risks undoing decades of legal and cultural progress that have made safety a community responsibility rather than a private burden. Of course, because he is that abuser. He abuses women. I mean, seriously, grab him by the pussy? He has no respect for women, so of course he thinks that domestic violence doesn't exist. Because if it did, he would be guilty of it, which he has been found guilty of it. Many, many times. So yeah, he isn't just trying to belittle women, which he's doing that too. That, oh yeah, women are just blowing shit out of proportion. Men don't do that stuff. Men just protect women, blah, 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 blah. Whatever else abusers claim that they're doing in order to gaslight women. But he's an abuser. So, of course he's going to protect other abusers, because he's an abuser himself. So, yeah. Yeah, women shouldn't just, work harder to please her man so he doesn't beat the crap out of her and have no recourse and be stuck in an abusive relationship. No, that should not be a thing. Women shouldn't do that. Men shouldn't settle for that. If you're being abused, you should be able to have resources to get out. Because what do abusers do? And they're really good at doing it. Isolating the victim. So they feel like they have no out. In the case of women, in a case of men, it's actually easier because women, you can just cut them off from their families and friends and do all that stuff and make them not be aware, make sure they're not aware of resources that they have access to. With men, well, think about how men are treated if they come out as a rape victim. How can men get raped? It's not physically possible, even though stimulation is fucking stimulation. It does not matter whether you want it or not. I mean, I shouldn't have to be telling people that. So yeah, for men it's actually easier because of the shame. There's still that stigma of men should not be victims of domestic violence, especially if that domestic violence is from a woman, because men should be ashamed that a woman can do that. Even though there are scenarios of where that indeed happens. So men are shamed into shutting up. Women are a bit more emboldened, but again, if you cut them off from everything, then they're stuck too. All right. Representative Gwen Moore, a Democrat from Wisconsin who has championed legislative efforts against domestic violence, said such crimes amount to abuse that devastates families, endangers women and children, and takes lives every single day. Exactly, because the domestic abuser wants to possess the woman, the children, and if they can't do that, then they're just going to kill them. I mean, when you hear about Amber Alerts and it's the father, it's basically the father trying to possess the children. And if he cannot possess the children, he will kill them. Or he just wants to elicit pain from his spouse or ex-spouse and kill the children just to hurt her, because he just sees her and the children as objects. So it doesn't matter what he does to them because they're his to do with what he wants. As a survivor of domestic violence, I found President Trump's comments today downplaying domestic violence deeply offensive and disturbing, she said in a statement. Trump has a long history of violence against women that makes his dismissiveness unsurprising. Well, I'm glad at least somebody is aware of that. Okay, so that is the end of that article. And I believe that is all I have for this video. So with that, I will see you guys in the next one.